Hello, this is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to the Sunday Forum on this Sunday, Reformation Sunday, on October 30th. We're glad that you can join us as we prepare for the celebration on Sunday. Remember, wear red to the worship service on Sunday. You know, because it's Reformation Sunday, many times we as Lutherans have celebrated this worship service many times. We enjoy singing "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." But often we forget the story behind the Reformation, the story of Martin Luther, of his standing up and discovery of the gospel, of saying, "Here I stand, I can do no other." And so we want to take this Sunday Forum to tell that story. And I want to encourage you to maybe go this week and watch some films on the Reformation or read some books. I have this book on Martin Luther, a man who changed the world. It's a very simple book. It was put out by Thrivent, but even the simplest books are good for the memory, good for thinking back to the story, of getting us once again to remember it's not just about our identity as Lutherans. Actually, the whole church should embrace the Reformation. It's the discovery of the gospel. And so before we show 3 film clips, which will tell that story, we're going to show one of a very famous movie. We're going to show another clip from the BBC, and a third clip from the History Channel, just to see how each of those then shares the story. But first, let me read from this book, right from the beginning of the story. It says that Martin was born at Eisleben in Germany in 1483, 9 years before Columbus sailed to America. In those days, the Christian church no longer based its belief on the Bible or what the Bible said about the gospel. It had actually invented new doctrines and practices that Jesus and his apostles had never taught. Sadly, too, the church leaders of that time, far from setting a good example for their people, sinned worse than the people did themselves. And so now we want to dig deep into the story of Martin Luther and his rediscovery of the gospel. Enjoy these clips. But I wanted to start with this one. And it's the story of Martin Luther, and we want to tell the story, one could use various angles, of his discovery of grace, of justification by grace through faith. And here is a small clip. It's actually a trailer from this 1973 film. I put 74 here because I think that's the year it actually came out and was published. It could be seen in cinemas. You'll see the trailer because it gives various images from the life of Luther, right from the beginning where he starts in the monastery to where he's standing in front of Charles V, the Emperor of the Roman Empire. Let's watch this clip together.
One man, one monumental life that changed the lives of millions. Luther.
Now you must choose one of 2 ways. Once you have committed yourself, you are not free for whatever reasons to throw off the yoke of obedience.
Satan foresaw in me what I'm suffering now. That's why he prepares open pits for me and all kinds of tricks to bring me down.
You're a fool. You're really a fool. God isn't angry with you. It's you who are angry with him.
God, do you hear me? Are you dead? Are you dead?
Stacy Keach as Martin Luther. Alone in an epic struggle against the awesome power of the established church.
You may know him as the head of the church, which he still may be. Like a fish is the head of a cat's dinner, eyes without sight. God has told me there can be no dealings between this cat's dinner and me.
Get your money out!
There are blasphemies flourishing.
An indulgence in every envelope. And one of these can be yours.
But the truth is, the just shall live by faith alone.
Today, now.
By faith alone!
In an age of panoply and wanton power,
His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor Charles V.
Martin Luther fought with himself and found the faith to fight the world.
Common men want common things. It's not your theology they want, it's the earthly property of Mother Church, not the sacraments, dear Martin, the silverware.
I am appalled by this evil and cynical view.
We are at the brink of violence and pillage and anarchy. You can stop that.
I believe in the goodness of ordinary men, and I do not fear them.
I cannot and will not recant, since to act against one's conscience is neither safe nor honest. Here I stand. God help me. I can do no more.
John Osborne's Luther, a great work of the theater, becomes one of the most acclaimed films of our age.
The thing I like about Stacy Keach, he brings that intensity to the role of Martin Luther. But I think we should review also some of the history of the Reformation so we can put these stories of Luther into the context of his day. 1517 is when the Lutheran Reformation begins, when Luther nails these 95 theses or arguments to the door of the chapel in Wittenberg. 1521, he appears before the Diet of Worms, where he becomes defiant over against Charles V. Here I stand, I can do no other. 1522, then he has to flee, and because he's been named a heretic, that means anyone can arrest him or kill him. He flees to the Wartburg Castle, and there, what's he gonna do, right? Well, he translates the New Testament into German, and that not only brought the Bible into the hands of the people so they could read it, because before it was in Latin and only those who were educated and trained could read that, but in the process of translating the New Testament, he created actually the German language. He united all of Germany around a common vocabulary. We remember from earlier this summer, the pandemic breaks out in 1527. Afterwards, he goes and visits all his people, and in response, he writes the Small Catechism because he is struck by the poor spiritual condition of the people in and around Wittenberg. 1530 then is the Augsburg Confession, where people come together and over against the medieval Catholic Church. They make their confession together. Luther dies in 1546. A year later is when all the princes gather together and start to fight the small cultic wars. And it's bloody and was not really resolved until 1555, the Peace of Augsburg. And they resolved it with this compromise. They said, okay, cuius regio, ius religio, meaning whatever the faith of the prince will now become the faith of the people. So the prince could decide in any region of Germany what the faith would be, Catholic, Lutheran, Calvinist, and then that would be the faith of their people. But here's some interesting statistics about, okay, starts in Germany and Wittenberg. Where is Lutheranism today? And you can see the largest Lutheran church in the world is in Ethiopia with 8.3 million people. Tanzania, 6.5 million. Sweden right behind, 6.3 million. The Batak church at 4.5 million. Denmark, 4.4, Finland, 4.2, Norway, 3.8, and the ELCA, the 8th largest Lutheran church in the world, with 3.7 million. Now, I could keep going, the smaller Lutheran churches in the world, but as you look at the top 8, you might be asking, well, where's Germany? Where's the German Lutheran church? You know, how about Germany? Well, in Germany, there are 12,202,382 Lutherans, but that's not one Lutheran church. There are 12 different regions in Germany. Each region has their own Lutheran church, each with the size of about 1 to 2 million Lutherans. And therefore, together, when you put all those Lutheran churches together, all 12, it's a big number, but otherwise, they're smaller than the ones that I showed before. And Lutheranism worldwide. I love these statistics, and I hope you enjoy them too. 50% of all Lutherans live in Europe. 50%. That's quite a development over 500 years since the Reformation. In Africa, The largest Lutheran churches are in Ethiopia and Tanzania. We saw that previously. But it's also interesting that in little Namibia, Lutherans are 50% of the whole country's population. In Asia, the largest Lutheran churches are in Indonesia and India, in Oceania, Papua New Guinea, and in Latin America, Brazil. Those are the places, again, with the largest Lutheran churches in the world. All right, when we tell these stories or when we see all these statistics, our interest is always to go back to the core experience of Martin Luther and the Reformation, which was an experience of grace. Luther's spiritual struggle to find a gracious God, because in his struggle, we see our own struggle to receive the grace of God and not work out or try to earn our own salvation. So let's view this second clip. It's from the 1983 version, Martin Luther the Heretic, where Jonathan Pryce plays the role of Luther, and this is a BBC production. Notice now how they frame Luther's struggle for grace. Let's watch together.
I must go back.
You're a wanted man. They're looking for you all over Germany.
Then they'll find me.
Martin Luther, monk of the Augustinian order, notorious heretic, child of Satan, shall not be nourished by food or drink, shall not be assisted by word or deed. Wherever he may be met, shall be taken prisoner and delivered up in close custody to the punishments that have been provided.
Now they call me a notorious heretic, a child of Satan. When I was a child, the traveling players came every spring with their tales of heaven and hell. I knew that the human soul was weak and sinful, and that I was weak, and that the devil rejoiced in my weakness. I knew that all my sins would be counted and weighed against me, and that the Lord God, judge of all mankind, must deliver the unworthy to the fires of hell.
Miserere mei, Deus! Ite maledicti in ignem aeternum.
There is a power of evil in the world. There is a day of judgment. I am what I am today because I have lived my life in terror of that judgment.
Sins, O Lord, who shall survive? I wait for the Lord, my soul does wait, and in his word do I hope.
Once I was a monk, now I'm a heretic. Nothing has changed, except that I've traveled further down the same road.
Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord God, hear my voice. If you count our sins, O Lord, who shall survive? I wait for the Lord, my soul does wait, and in his word do I hope. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning.
I entered the monastery seeking the mercy of the Lord, hoping to find refuge from the powers of evil. I did my duty as a monk, I prayed and fasted. I confessed my sins and performed my penances. But not for a single day did I find peace. What if I fasted? Was I not proud of it? What if I praised God? Could God not smell my fear? This fear itself made me doubt the goodness of God. And so I became even more afraid.
My soul is wait for the Lord more than watchful wait for the morning. Let Israel hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is mercy, and he shall redeem Israel.
It seemed to me that I and all mankind were locked in a prison of our own weakness, and that other men were blessedly blind, and that I alone was condemned to see.
You want to be like a baby before it leaves the womb.
There was only one man who understood me in those days. My Father Superior, John Staupitz.
You don't want to have anything to do about the world, all that dirt, all that knowledge, but it can't be done. There's no way back. I'm told you were in the confessional yesterday evening for 6 hours.
Yes, Father Staupitz.
Doesn't that strike you as greedy?
If I commit a sin, Father, I must confess it.
6 hours. So are you now free from sin?
No, Father Staupitz. Father, if I'm wrong, I'm ready to be corrected. Father, can any man ever be free from sin? Then how am I to escape?
Escape? You're not in prison.
Not in prison. You don't think so? There are walls all around me, Father. I can feel them. Can I be free from sin? No. Is there a day of judgment? Yes. Is God indifferent to sin? No. Must I be damned? Yes. You see, there are 4 walls. There's no way out.
Let Israel hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is mercy.
Oh, is God merciful? If God's merciful, let there be no judgment. Let there be no damnation and no hell. Let's all go to heaven and live with the angels.
You feel abandoned. You feel powerless. You're filled with anger. You hate God. You think you're the first man who ever doubted the goodness of God.
Tell me what to do, Father.
Eat more food. Get more sleep. Learn more about God.
If I'm free now, it's because John Staupitz set me on the road to freedom. He wanted me to learn more about God. So, wise man that he was, he turned me into a teacher. I was still a young monk when he made me a lecturer in theology and sent me to Wittenberg.
Now, did you enjoy those clips? And as you notice, we also reviewed some of the outline of the Reformation. I hope you found that helpful. And we took the story beyond Martin Luther over the last 500 years. Where is the Lutheran Church today all around the world? But now we want to watch a final clip, one of my favorite from the History Channel. Please watch this clip and enjoy.
Christianity was once a monolithic religion, with traditions not of questioning and rebellion, but of doctrine and obedience. As the 1500s dawn, the Roman Catholic Church dominates almost every aspect of European life. Political boundaries mean little, since even kings bow down to the Church. In a sense, the Pope is the ruler of the Western world. Challenging the Catholic Church, either politically or spiritually, seems unthinkable.
Its main source of power was that it taught, and people really believed, that if they made a misstep, they would burn in hell forever, and if they were on the right side of things, they would have bliss forever.
But the church's leaders do not always behave in accordance with their dictates.
Priests having wives or taking money for forgiving sins is an old story in the church. The interesting point is now people looked more critical at the church because they were now more concerned with their own piety and also the question of the afterlife.
In 1492, the year Christopher Columbus first reaches the New World, Pope Alexander VI becomes the head of the church. Alexander is from the Borgia family, notorious for corruption and decadence. Although all priests in the Catholic Church are supposed to be celibate, Alexander has had several children with his mistresses.
I think every Catholic historian of the last 30, 40, 50 years would say that the papacy was at its lowest point. The Borgia family and other families, political figures, princes, were essentially buying the papacy.
To fund this elaborate lifestyle, the Pope targets his rich enemies. They are accused of trumped-up crimes, imprisoned, and often murdered. Afterwards, the Church confiscates their properties. On one infamous night, according to widely told tales, the papal palace hosts a grand orgy. 50 prostitutes writhe on a floor scattered with chestnuts. Priests and other officials who perform with the most women are given prizes. Many people are outraged by stories like these. But in 1517, one man in this tiny German town of Wittenberg will turn the course of church history.
It is remarkable that a monk got this all started in an obscure university town. And I always compare it to there's gasoline all over the garage floor, and all Martin Luther had to do was toss a match.
Born in 1483, Martin Luther is originally headed for a career as a lawyer, a career he took up at the insistence of his father.
There's none of that sort of revolutionary, rebellious nature in the background of Martin Luther. There's nothing which gives you the indication this was a man destined to confront the Catholic Church or change European history.
But at 21, Luther commits his first act of rebellion, leaving his family and his studies to become an Augustinian monk. For the next 12 years, Luther tries to find peace within the teachings of the Catholic Church.
You have to understand that Luther was a good monk. He did all the right things in the old system. He said Mass, he went to confession. But gnawing away at him was a sense of unworthiness, of an angry God.
Luther wrote,
I scrupulously carried out the penances which were allotted to me, and yet my conscience kept nagging. You fell short there. You were not sorry enough. You left that sin off your list.
Life in the monastery is made up of hard work, frequent prayer, and fasting. As a monk, Luther is obsessive in his search for personal purity and struggles to understand his relationship with God. His confessions are epic in their length.
There are not a lot of sins you could do in a monastery, and he really had to work at it, but he could confess for 6 hours. One time his confessor said, Brother Martin, you don't have to confess every fart to me. It doesn't have to be that serious.
That was at the core of Luther's angst, this haunting question, have I done enough to please God? What is my posture in the presence of this demanding God of a church that requires so much from me to be acceptable?
Luther scours the Bible for answers while teaching theology in the small university town of Wittenberg. The last straw for Luther, a church practice that scandalizes him, the selling of what are called indulgences.
It was believed that while none of us could pile up enough good works to be saved, the saints had done a superabundance of them. And they developed a kind of a treasury of merits and graces that could be drawn upon.
Access to that treasury is what the church sells to the people, for themselves, for friends, for loved ones who have already died, or even for sins to be committed in the future.
This is a so-called letter of indulgence. People believed that it was a kind of insurance. Not a life insurance, but an afterlife insurance. The idea being that once you've bought such a letter, you could safely go to heaven. And of course, the letter is printed, meaning mass production. The letter is in Latin, meaning an official church document. You have blank spaces for the name of the buyer, and also the date is filled in by hand and the price for which it has been sold.
What Luther could see in the Bible was no justification for this, that this was a completely man-made tradition, almost a scam. And as a result, he was incredibly worried for the salvation of those people who were buying into it.
The man who sells indulgences around Wittenberg is a Dominican friar, Johann Tetzel. Tetzel is part preacher, part huckster.
He would come into town with a bandwagon, create a big crowd, and there's this wonderful phrase of, every time I hear the money fall into the pot, another soul escapes to heaven. He was one of the Catholic Church's great showmen of the mid-16th century.
For Martin Luther, this spectacle is a sign that the Catholic Church has lost its way. He fears for the souls of those who think that their fate in the afterlife can be bought. Luther turns to the Bible for an answer.
The progress of Martin Luther from a good Catholic monk to the father of the Reformation is a long, tortuous intellectual process. At the heart of it is a reading of the Bible and a rereading of the Bible.
He finds a passage in Paul's letter to the Romans that will set in motion an unstoppable chain of events.
When Luther read Paul, he saw the same agony, but he also saw the affirmation that God will save, regardless of the fact that you and I are utterly worthless. God will save us in his infinite love.
The passage reads, "For in the gospel a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith."
He who through faith is righteous shall live. You don't need all the traditions of the church. You just need that powerful individual relationship with God.
It is a revolutionary idea. Salvation comes not from the man-made rituals of the church, but by faith alone. This means that not the Pope, not the Vatican, not even a priest is necessary to ensure a person's entrance into the kingdom of heaven.
So I hope that these clips, a little bit from this book, the outline of the Reformation, a review of where the Lutheran Church is today, I hope that all these stories have been helpful. Let me close again with this book, again, Martin Luther. It says that Martin Luther was buried beneath the pulpit in the Castle Church at Wittenberg. On the doors of that very church, nearly 30 years before, he had posted the 95 Theses that started the Reformation. And that will all be part of our celebration on this Sunday in worship. Again, wear your red, but above all, we want to lift up our experience of the gospel, of saving grace through faith. Thank you for joining us on the Sunday Forum. Bye-bye now.